So, Lawrence, you've occupied the world of composed music and improvised music. What was it that drew you to improvisation?
Good question. I actually did quite a lot of improvising from very, very early on, probably. So just the whole idea of sort of exploring sounds interested me, and that is really, that means improvising to do that. And so the other thing was that in the early days, the equipment was very imprecise, and it was often very difficult to get precise things from it. So the sense, there's a big piece that I did for the group Hydra in the 70s called Dodman Point, and which was scored for 3 VCS3 synthesizers, and various other stuff as well, with light. And what we did was we had certain moments of stasis within the piece,
right,
where we tuned everything in. And so it was this gradual arriving at the final sound, and then when we got that right, we could pause and then set off again on another journey to go to the next moment of stasis. And so that kind of, even though there was quite a lot of instructions as to what goes on the journey from one to the other, when we get there, it's tune it up until it sounds right. So improvisatory elements were definitely a kind of built into what I was doing, and so I felt that was
gradually
part
became,
of things.
Gradually became more and more the focus.
And then the other thing was that it's interesting that when in the 90s I began to get the kind of tools that I needed to be, in a sense, more precise. I was then going farther into improvisation, and the whole development of the signal processing instrument in the 90s was built around the idea of it being an instrument for improvising, and an instrument aimed specifically at improvising. And I had some wonderful models of musicians that I felt, I'd look at somebody like Barry Guy and the way he plays the bass. It's so physical and incredibly intense, and the way he does things. And I said, I want to play electronics like that.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was very much, I was fed up with sitting there manipulating faders or knobs and doing. I wanted to get in there and be very physical about it, which is part of the whole idea of the way where the SPI developed.
And do you feel your background because you're a percussionist?
Do you
think that influenced the way you wanted to interact?
Very much so. I mean, it was that percussion was really, well, my instrument was really electronics, but percussion was my other instrument, as it were, and I've never got on well with keyboards, and they just sort of seem the wrong shape and the wrong everything for me. They don't work for me. Although of course I studied piano and that kind of thing when I was in college, but it was somehow the whole idea of a percussion based thinking about how I was doing things just fitted for me and worked for me.
The gestural element.
Yeah, the kind of gestures that I could make. And so I, in those days in the 90s, I was working with drum pads, but they were pretty bulky and heavy and that kind of thing, and it got more and more difficult to cart them around. And so then I had some smaller drum pad units, from around the early 2000s, and but they proved not very reliable. They tended to break, and I think they weren't really made for taking on the road, made for being in somebody's bedroom studio.
Yeah.
And And so I then found the Novation Launchpad, which was very nice, but it missed one crucial thing, which was that there was no touch sensitivity.
I see, yeah.
And so they only deliver one, they deliver note instructions, but only with one dynamic. And so I didn't have dynamic control there. I had to sort of think of other ways of doing it. So when this year the Launchpad Pro came out with touch sensitivity, I was one of the first in the queue for anyone to get back into that, and it's.
And I suppose that's the case with a lot of the development.
Sure.
The technological changes have been the things you've been waiting for. Right?
Oh sure, yeah. Oh yeah. I mean that was always the way. I mean right from the beginning, I was sort of thinking. I remember when I first got my Earcam workstation in the early '90s, a colleague from the '70s came to visit me, and I was saying, look, I can do this, I can do that, I can do that. And he said, yes, I remember you talking about that 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So, it was so that whole sort of dream of what computers were going to be able to do was very important to me. And I mean, I spent quite a bit of time in the '80s actually developing my own DSP gear to try to get farther with this whole thing. And,
so the technology was finally catching up with
exactly.
what you're wanting to be doing.
Exactly, was getting there. And now the great thing, of course, is it's all so compact. You know, it's just I can go just a little array of stuff does everything.
Do you find that now everything you wanted to be able to do is possible, or there's still limits?
Of course there are limits. But I'm very, I'm quite content with where things are now. I don't need to develop things a lot more, and I just want to get on and enjoy playing it. And I think it's a good thing not to tinker after a while, because you can go on and on and on, and it's much better because every instrument has limitations, and so you work with those and work around them and how to stretch them as they are, and that's part of the dynamic of a lot of improvised music is taking this is the instrument, but I don't actually have to play it that way. I can play the other ways I can play it, other things I can do with it that extend the range of possibilities.
I suppose that's the challenge when you're developing electronic instruments. Often it is an instrument you want to be able to play as well.
Oh, so, sure, yeah.
So there's often this how much you want to develop it further, and how much you actually want to.
So I've added a few things in recent years, but it's the basic instrument has been the same since the 90s, and it's improvements of small improvements, incremental over the years have gone, but it's not. But the basics have been there for all that time.
So tell us about the signal processing instrument, its history and its development.
Well, as I say, when I started, when I got the hold of the Earcam signal processing workstation in the early 90s, the first thing I did was to rework some of the pieces that I had done, which where the electronic processing really didn't satisfy me very well, and I reworked a number of pieces like the Monk's Prayer, which is for flute and electronics. I really did that the way I had originally intended, and before we cobbled it together out of various delay systems and things, and this time I really worked it out precisely how to do it, and got all that right, and that's been a very successful piece. It's a great, really works very well. So, and yeah, one or two others like that I revamped. There's a CD from the which is the on Sargasso of some of those pieces, instrument electronic pieces, which are all realised on the EarCam workstation and doing that. But then the other thing that happened was that I was beginning to get more and more involved with improvised music and working with people like Barry Guy and Evan Parker, and I really wanted to be able to do it better, and I thought that is what really needs the time to think about how I can do this better, and how I can take something that really goes right back to my first experience of electronic music, when I felt that I always used to describe that then as being like moulding clay, you know, and you can push it in here and pull it out there, and shaping sounds in a very physical kind of way. And I wanted to be able to do that in real time, and I felt that this was what something like the EarCam workstation was really meant for, you know, as far as I was concerned. And so it was a case of really trying to find a way that worked for me. And one of the things, of course, that was around a lot at that stage were people using live sampling systems. The great Michel Weiswitz from Stein was one of the great masters of that, and various other people were also doing it. But one of the things I became aware of was that even in the hands of a master like Michel, I knew when he was recording and when he wasn't. I could sit there in the audience and say, "Oh, he's recording now. He's not playing. He's stopped playing. He's recording." And even if it was just for an instant, just to change the thing. And I thought, well, this is okay, fine. He's doing fantastic things. It's wonderful. I love it. But I don't want that for me. I don't want that distraction when I'm playing. I want to be able to just get in there and play. You know, you
don't want to be taken out.
Yeah, so moment. I want it to be the instrument, and you mentioned the moment. It is, to me, the whole thing is about the moment, about how the moment is developing, where the moment is going, where it's come from, how it's shaping, being shaped, and so I came up with something which really goes right back to the beginning. When I started in electronic music, there wasn't any sampling around. What we had a lot were delay systems.
Yes.
So, and there are a whole number of pieces from that period that used delay systems in various different ways. You know, Stockhausen's solo pieces. Composers like Cargill and done things. Also, Tristram Cary, my teacher, had written a piece called Narcissus for flute and recording, where he was recording and playing back and doing things like that. And so all these ideas came out. And so the whole idea of being able to use and manipulate delays in interesting ways was built into what I had been doing, and a lot of my improvising was done using tape delay systems, which consisted of having 2 or 3 recorders with a tape going across them. And one of the things I did a lot was we had variable speed recorders, so I could change the speeds on them, and so that affected how it was recording, and also how it was playing back what had been recorded already, and you could do some wonderful manipulations with that. So the whole idea that a delay could be manipulated, and there was was something I'd been working with for a long time, and I thought about, one of the things I thought about a lot was, well, with this kind of system, can I devise a way that I can have a delay system? The great advantage of the delay system is it's recording all the time. So everything is being recorded.
Yeah.
And so what I have to do is find what's been recorded. And so I came up with the idea of a trigger. So when a sound is played, sound goes into the delay, it triggers a timer, starts a timer running. So then when I hit a one of these, that I find it reads off the current time. It reads the current time of the delay line, and sets a delay tap to that time. And so that was the way I had a way of finding the sounds, but in a very dynamic sort of way.
Yeah.
And also really, really important to me was this thing that I can be right up on top of the sound, or I can be or I can go on and be much farther away from the sound without, and that's completely seamless.
And you're not having to make decisions.
I don't have to make. All I do is make decisions about delaying how I play. You know, it's the way I play. It's just like playing a different note. You know, it's playing a different time. You know, so that was very, very important. There's quite a lot about that in the paper that I wrote back in the 90s. About the whole description of the system, and this idea of the triangle of you can focus on the sound that the instrument being processed is making. You can focus on the sound that I'm making, but you can also go into there's another whole thing I'll have to show you later because it's not set up.
Yeah.
But where I can make delays that last for a hell of a long time. You know.
I've seen you refer to. Categories of local and field. And
that's right. That was based on this. There was an article that Simon Emerson wrote about the relating sounds on tape to an instrument and how they go. And I just extended that idea that there are three. There's a third category which is me.
Okay.
You see, and so there's sometimes. I can play something. I mean, perhaps when one of you guys plays it, we can illustrate it more clearly. That I can be really right, very close to what you're playing, just, and it's very recognisable, and I can make that follow in. Other times, I really take over and make, and my gestures become more important. And I think this is the crucial thing: it's how the gestures are understood and related that really become. It's not just the actual sounds, but the shapes, the morphology of the sound, and what kind of morphology you make, and then what kind of morphology I make, and how those combine. And then we go to a stage where we've got sounds that, well, they're just around and. Okay, they did come from you originally and from what I did after that, but they've become sort of separated away into what we call the idea of fields of sound, which are kind of ambient sounds, as it were.
And you can't determine the source.
Yeah, and it's sometimes it's you know you can be pretty clear, you're pretty sure what it is, but sometimes it can go completely beyond that. And I wanted to be able to deal with that in a very immediate and very what's the word I'm looking for? sorry. Deal with that in a very direct sort of way that I can move from one to the other and I can move across and because one of the things I really, really love is sort of grey areas. I don't, in all sorts of my thinking is always not, this is one end of the process, this is the other end. There's all these very interesting things in the middle. This is where the interesting stuff happens. And with this 3-part thing, I can move across and move into all sorts of different relationships between the 3 elements, and that's what I wanted to be able to do, and that's.
And that's the heart of live processing, I suppose, isn't it?
Yeah, well, certainly for me, and the kind of things that I do, and being able to be, just as immediate and just as direct as a player of a conventional instrument can be. And I think that's what, from what other people have said, that one of the things they get from working with me is that it is like another instrument. And that's the way I do it.
What were your first experiences using live electronics in an improvised context?
Oh gosh, mostly working with like a VCS3 synthesizer, and often I would use that as much as a processing machine as a synthesizing machine. They were very good at they had filters, ring modulators, and various, so they were very good at being processing machines as well as generators. So I used that, and then I used, as I say, I used delay systems with 2 or more tape recorders joined together, and I talked about the manipulation of the speed of the tape, which is because as you change the speed, it not only changes the output speed of what's coming out of it, but it also changes the input. So as you slow it down, the input is getting compressed up. So then, if you then speed it up again, you can take that material way up, and you can, and by linking, and it's very neat the way the 2 are kind of linked together, and you can we made some very nice things with that. Then I was working a lot with variety of musicians playing different instruments and stuff, and so the whole idea for me of electronics as a processing system was what I think what appealed to me most. And so, I started from very early. I started on the course at the college in '67 with Tristram Cary, and really quite quickly I got into experimenting with live stuff. And so my first real live piece was in '69, solos, commentaries and integrations, where I was doing live processing of the clarinet. And then I did another piece for piano and live electronics in 1970. That was Transformations 2. And a number of other things. Then in the early 70s I was starting to work with the Hydra group, and we made this piece which is based around using live VCS3s. They are mostly as generators there. And so it was always that kind of thing. That was the kind of improvising I was doing.
Yeah.
I had previously done a bit when I was in Chicago. I did a bit of improvising, and but I didn't really have an instrument. That was my problem. I'd started, although I was gone through music college and got a degree in composition, I I wasn't really, percussion was my most advanced instrument, but I hadn't started studying that until I was already in the college in Chicago. I'd done piano lessons, but I wasn't really a pianist, and as I say, the keyboard just doesn't seem to work for me really.
Yeah.
And I'd done organ lessons as well, actually, and so I didn't really have a proper instrument that I felt comfortable with, and so it was actually the electronics that opened up the possibility for becoming my instrument, as it were, you know. And so that again opened up the possibilities of improvisation, and I did quite a lot of things that were moving around between improvisation and written material.
Yeah.
The Hydra group, we did quite a lot of stuff that was crossed over. There was a piece I wrote for Hydra, which is a collaboration with the sound poet Bob Cobbing, which is called Hydrangea, which was there. We made a lot of printed material and stuff, which was used as the basis. Although it was improvised, it was all based around things. I had VCS3 synthesizers again, playing material, but again it was set out what sort of material and what kind of things were going to happen. But then it was free as to exactly how it formed. But the timing was quite tightly controlled across the thing. So it's that's what that piece does, is it takes the word hydrangea and stretches it out so it lasts for an hour. And so we explore all the different sounds within the word hydrangea.
Right.
And so Bob he made these texts. At the time he was working a lot with using what's virtually unknown now, called a system called Letroset, which was used for making printed material with. So you got stick-on letters in all different fonts, and so he would take them and chop them up and put them in strange orders and that kind of thing, and so we've got the texts for Hydrangea are based on taking the letters of Hydrangea and scrambling them up in different ways and doing that. And then we had instrumentalists. So it was always two voices, two instruments, and two people doing electronics, and it was and we had different combinations of that lot. But so that was the kind of improvising I was doing at that stage. And then later on with the Electroacoustic Cabaret, we did quite a bit of improvised stuff, again quite often within some kind of structure. And but it really opened out. I think the thing with me was I didn't have an instrument I was really comfortable with.
Yeah.
That I felt, this is my instrument. This is the way I'm doing. You know, I did quite a lot of stuff with Bob, and that's of course it's all improvised, really. You know, so you'll base things around text sometimes, but and so it's really the time, and what happened was that just at the time when all this new technology became available to me, I got together with Evan Parker, and we were wanting to do stuff together.
Yeah.
And I think it was interesting. I think it was a very crucial time for him as well. He was sort of looking for a new way forward, a new way to develop things. He'd already done some stuff with electronics, with people like Walter Prati, and so we and I had done a short residency at Stein in Amsterdam, which would have been the beginning of '96, I guess. And Michel, I talked to him about the ideas I had of working with Evan, and Michelle said, well, I've always wanted to get Evan here, put in a proposal and get Evan. So I put in a proposal, and I spent 3 weeks at Stein, and Evan spent about 2 of them with me.
Yeah.
And we were just in the studio, and we just worked on stuff together, you know. And I would say, okay, let's go. I need to work on something, need to work on this bit, so you do what you want, and he'd either go for a walk or do the crossword or something, and then there come a time, okay, I'm ready, let's try again, you know, and so we were working like that, and then we said, well, after a couple of days, we thought, well, perhaps we ought to record all this stuff, you know, and so I set up the recorder, and we did, and that became the CD Solar Wind, which was just a tremendous breakthrough for both of us, you know, and that was we achieved something very special with that.
So many people will be familiar with your work in Evan Parker's Electroacoustic Ensemble. Can you tell us a bit about that group and how it operates?
Yeah. It's what happened was that when I first started working with Evan, which is about 95, I'd known him before, and we'd been involved in 1 or 2 things, but in fact in 1995, the London Jazz Composers Orchestra, it was the 25th anniversary, and we invited them to perform in Colorscape, and Barry wrote a special piece for Colorscape, and I did some processing on that, and Evan said, oh, he really liked what I was doing, and said he'd really like me to join the ensemble. They hadn't a tour and something lined up for the following year, but it was all too organised by then. He couldn't really slot in anyone else. But anyway, I felt I still really wanted to work on getting an instrument that I felt comfortable with. But that was the challenge. That was what really put me. I need to get that sorted.
Yeah.
And so it wasn't until there was a tour in December '98 when, but by this time I'd done the work in Stein in '97 with Evan, and Barry came along for part of that as well, and so I felt the instrument was coming on, was beginning to work, and then Evan said, well, we've got this tour coming up, and can you join? And one of the things they'd done previous to that was that they had, it was based around the trio of Evan, Barry and Paul Litton, with 3 people doing processing, which were the 2 Italians, Walter Prati and Marco Vecchi, and with with Phil Waxman also doing processing.
Yeah.
And what they did was Phil processed Barry, and Walter processed Evan, and Marco processed Paul. And I immediately said, well, if I'm going to join the ensemble, I really think I want to take a more fluid role and be able to process anybody at any time and be able to move that around. And so Evan thought for a while, and he said, well, is it possible for everybody to be able to process everybody? And I said, I didn't see why not. It's just a matter of working out how to route the signals so we all get all the signals.
Yeah.
So I devised a scheme to do that, which we used in that tour in '98, and the CD that we recorded then, which is called Drawn Inward.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was how that I became part of the group. And so for quite a long time I kind of became the kind of technical coordinator for it, kind of pretty unofficially, but just by default really.
Yeah.
And so I as it developed, I kept sort of devising ways to do it. The next thing was that in 2002 we did concerts in and recording in Oslo, and two more people joined, which was Augusti Fernandez on piano and Joe Wright also doing live processing. And so basically the system ramped up to accommodate those people. And also more and more Phil was really getting away from processing other people and concentrating on playing the violin, and viola, and so it kind of went on. It went on from there. But as it got bigger, it got more and more difficult for me to cope with all that. And so by the time we got to the biggest version, which was at concerts in Lisbon in, what was that, 2010 I think, and Huddersfield in 2012, was it? Yes, I think. That I was, we had to get, it was just too big for everybody. I mean, this was up to 18 people at this stage, because Peter Van Bergen was playing, John Russell was playing, more and more people coming in, and so it was it just getting more and more complicated. So it was, and I think the problem now, I think, is probably that very few people can afford a group that size. And so what's happened in recent years is that Evan has worked with smaller subsets. So there's kind of an American electroacoustic ensemble and there's a British electroacoustic ensemble. We played last year in Evan's series at Cafe Otto with Paul Obermeyer and I did electronics. Barry Galley and Adam Linson on bass and Evan, and so that was I think that's just practicality really. Yeah.
And within the ensemble, those of you contributing the electronic element, how are those roles kind of balanced, and how do your approaches sort of compare?
Well, I think yes. Well, I'm going to think the first thing, the interesting thing, is that, I mean, the main thing is three. Marco Vecchi more and more focused on the mixing and sound projection, with some processing, but relatively minimal. So it's really Walter Prati and Joe Ryan and I doing the main stuff. And what Evan got to it back in '98, we were simply playing improvised pieces, and we had a plan for which combinations we're going to play, which pieces, and that was it. And that changed perhaps a bit over the course of the tour, but normally. And but as it got bigger, from Oslo, Evan began to think in terms of sections where we're focusing on one particular aspect of the thing, i.e. it might be one person processing one person, or it might be all three of us processing one person, or it might be all three of us processing different people, or we had ways of some kind of transitional ones where it starts off with one person processing and then the other two join in gradually, or other players join in gradually, various different models of how we might structure a section. And so we had several sections and working that way. That became the pattern then right up through from then on.
So there was a plan as to
there was a plan,
the configurations.
There was a plan which was more or less based around configurations. And then later Evan became more encouraging to people saying, okay, the focus here is on Joel processing Augusti, say. This doesn't mean that everybody else has to remain quiet all the time, but you are, be aware that you are in a subsidiary role at that stage, and that we're all focusing on what's happening there, and we can comment on it and elaborate it in ways that whatever ways seem appropriate. And that would build up, and then of course there were tutti sections as well, of course, where we got, and we had a different kind of tutti sections. There's one in the Oslo piece is the what was that CD called? Memory Vision. And that is there's a tutti in that where all hell is breaking loose, and there's another kind of tutti where all sorts of floating things are just very gently happening, and so we allowed for all these kind of things, and I think with an ensemble of that kind of size, it makes a lot of sense to organise things in that way, and it gave us a lot of freedom to respond to what was happening and to think in the sound, and didn't we didn't have to sit and wait for our turn. It didn't inhibit things, and that worked very well.
And were the length of those sections determined as well? Or?
Yes, they were generally quite precise, and usually Paul Litton had a role. He had a sign that he would make a sound, and that signals the beginning of the next section, and that was one. So we had a sort of standard thing to respond to.
Tell us about some of your recent collaborations.
Ooh, I have lots of them really. It's one of them is since coming to Oxford, I've been playing with Martin Hackett. He plays a Korg analog synthesizer with lots of interesting modifications on it, and we started off with me actually processing his sound, but I find there are limits on processing already electronic sounds, because it tends to just sound more electronic, and you don't get the kind of clarity that you get from, say, working with an instrumentalist, and where it's quite clear what is his original sound and what are my transformations. So we've been moving away from that, because I've also been developing something which I've done for a long time, but I've been focusing on that more recently, of simply processing my own voice. And so that is what the kind of main focus of what we're doing now is I'd still have the option to process some of his sound if I want to, but the main focus is now on me using my voice to original. And when I use voice, I tend to work with it. I work with a very close microphone, work with a lot of very quiet sounds, and what you hear, what the audience hears, is the processed sound, not the original. And I like working that way. So I like thinking of it. It's a way of exciting the instrument, sort of thing. And you're not meant to focus on what the original sounds are, but on what the process sounds are. And I've used that a lot in my solo work, where I also work with percussion instruments. I've got a big collection of gongs. Okay, well, when I start playing gongs, you're going to hear the gongs anyway. Yeah. But there's still, the balance is such that the focus is much more on the processed sound than on the originals. And so I mix it up. Sometimes there are some groups where I use percussion as well as processing the others. For example, the trio with Martin Mays and Gianni Mimo, which is called Granularities. We have a CD due out any minute now, and that I've always used some percussion with that group. And it just seemed to fit with what they do and what I do and that kind of thing. So I've got a lot of options as to how I do things. Other things around, I've worked for a very long time with Viv Corringham, and we've been doing more duo work together recently. For a while she wasn't really in England very much, but now she's coming back more often, so we try to get together and do something. We've got a CD in the pipeline as well, and another CD which is due out very soon is the duo with Phil Waxman, which again we've got several things. We've got him processing himself in there. We've got some pieces where I've focused. We just focused on our core instruments, where I'm processing and he's playing and I'm processing. Other bits where he's playing mostly acoustic and I'm doing processing some of my percussion. And then other bits where I'm processing percussion and him together. So we again, that was one where the percussion seemed to fit in well. That came out of a performance we did once in Colorscape, where I was processing percussion and he was playing violin. I thought, that sounds really good. That's really nice. Let's develop that. And so we've done that. Another of my main collaborators at the moment is Jean-Michel van Schalfborg, and both as a duo and in various combinations. We have a lovely trio with the Japanese pianist Yoko Miura, and we've also we've got a quartet with Phil Waxman again and Mick Beck, bassoonist from Sheffield, which is a lovely combination. And I'm planning to put those together along with Yoko's a collaboration with Charlie Collins, and so I'm forming a sextet out of that group, and we're planning a tour for next year sometime. So it's,
brilliant.
And there, you know, loads of other people
Yeah.
like playing with it. I've always enjoyed playing with lots of different people, and that's very good. There's another recent CD which probably people might not know because it's basically published privately with a wonderful German man called Hans Casserley, who makes all his own instruments and also does prepared piano stuff, and so we recorded that 2 or 3 years ago, a duo of him doing various instruments and prepared piano and me processing.
Yeah.
And that's called Sculptures of Wires and Drifts, which he issued privately, but I do have copies if anyone wants them.
Yeah.